additional challenge with APIs is that some DDoS attacks are based on JSON or XML payloads, right? So this is a kind of attack that neither the load balancer nor Cloud Armor understands, right? They might let it through. So this is only to say that in addition to just using those standard set of technologies like load balancers and Cloud Armor, you might want to use RPG in order to create document version, expose, deploy your APIs, right? For a variety of reasons, and one of those reasons is security, because RPG offers some mechanisms like OAuth, like API keys, like role-based access control, and also that API level security, right? This is where I'm saying some attacks that might pass through Cloud Armor, which Cloud Armor might not detect because it doesn't understand the JSON payload, right? RPG does understand those requests and can protect you additionally, right? So I don't want to go into too much details here. You don't have to know it all the bits and pieces, but be aware of that kind of a pattern about those kind of threats and about RPG being able to protect you from those to some extent, right? So we've got the first topic covered, right? The second one is ransomware mitigation. So ransomware basically is where, some of your data might be encrypted by someone, right? Of course, you don't know the encryption key there, and basically you are asked for a ransom, and Google is scanning those attachments in the meantime and might block them if it finds something suspicious, right? So this is where end users are mostly protected to some extent without any active actions from their end, right? When it comes to protecting from ransomware from the platform itself, right, from GCP, there is a nice document that explains what might you do in order to increase that level of protection. Basically, it is know your assets, right? It's about managing access to your systems. It's about using DLP, which, as you have probably noticed, was just rebranded to sensitive data protection, but it's like the same service. It is DLP that you learned about. Also, you would set up zero trust security. You might use some, hardware security tokens there. You might follow this privilege approach. You might also, obviously handle or protect your service account, but also protect your data, right? So the idea here is that, first of all, if your data is somehow redundant, or if you do some backups, right, of your data and then offload those backups somewhere else, then you mitigate those risks, right? Because even if your original data gets attacked, gets encrypted by someone, you lose access to that. You don't have to negotiate. You don't have to pay. You don't have to risk that person wouldn't even decrypt it anyway. You have some kind of a backup which you can use, right? So those are the measures that you can use on your own to protect yourself from that kind of security threats, right? And another great resource, there was OWASP top 10 mitigation options. It's not a very up-to-date one, right? Pretty outdated a couple of years ago, but still it gives you some idea of which services within GCP you would use to address which of those top 10 OWASP threats, right? So maybe I will just share the link with you, and this is where we can actually move forward with, one more slide. It's not strictly about ransomware, but this is to say that one of those most common attacks right now when it comes to public clouds is called crypto jacking, something like that, right? So it's about someone using your cloud resources, using your VMs, using your credits to create VM, favorite third-party CM type of tools. So obviously the most popular ones are Splunk, Datadog, and others. And this is to say that you don't have to know. About them too much. You just have to know that it is possible to send the logs from GCP to those third-party tools so that those tools make the analysis, inform you, protect you, and so on and so forth, right? All of those integrations are very similar. They are based on a similar approach where you would have your logs in cloud logging, right? Or in some kind of a log router sync, right? We talked about those things. And basically, this is where those syncs would be in the form of a PubSub topic, right? Easy as that. You have the integration between GCP and those same type of tools based on PubSub. Sometimes you have data flow somewhere in the middle. Data flow is able to do those transformations of data if needed, and then it would send out the data to that third-party CM tool, right? This is the basic idea. If you know that kind of a pattern, then you would be good from the exam perspective. If you want to practice, if you are using some of those tools, this is where you can follow some of those links that I have shared, right? In parallel, Google created their own CM type of tool, slash bought a company, I guess that was the Mandiant thing that I think they bought, and this is how they came up with that Chronicle solution, right? So Chronicle, I think it is even called something different now. It's not explicitly called Chronicle. I think it's called SecOps, right? So if you go to the console, you will not find Chronicle directly anymore. It used to be there. Now you have to go to SecOps, right? And that's where you would see that product. And obviously, since those products are like enterprise grade, paid solutions, well, it is not something you might be able to see for yourself, right? But basically, that kind of a solution is there within GCP. Obviously, Google is saying it has some advantages over the others, right? So those advantages are mostly that it's cloud native. You don't have to offload logs outside of Google, meaning you save on egress. It scales as much as it needs to scale, right? And Google says that the cost advantage is you do not pay for the amount of data that you store, but you pay for, I guess there is per user license, right? So Google is saying that with the other third-party tools, you might probably choose to delete your data too soon because you want to save the costs, right? And because you would be doing that, some of the threats might not be detected by that same type of tool, right? Versus with Chronicle, I think Google keeps up to 12 months of logs, if I'm not mistaken, and this allows you to detect some of those threats in the long run, right? But obviously, this is a bit of a marketing slide, so just be aware that Google has their own tool. You should not be asked like concretely directly about the details of those. Be aware it's there, and be aware that the integration with other tools is based on PubSub. That's what I would say for the example, right? Now Nikesh asked, can you collect logs from the on-premises systems to Chronicle? I think in general, yes, but you have to look at each of those systems, right? Because the integration is provided either from Google, from Chronicle, or from that other systems, right? And some other systems, I don't remember which one, but I remember, I think it was Datadog, that was quite protective and was quite strict about sending some data to outside, not specifically to Google, but from that tool to somewhere, right? So you have to, I don't see any technical constraints here. I would ask you to check per the tool that you're interested in to see how, if and how that integration is done, right? But because it's mostly about some security assumptions and not the technical constraints, I would say, right? So just like you can integrate with PubSub in from GCP to outside, you can integrate via PubSub from outside to GCP, right? In the other way around, so no issues with that. Okay, and this is the one of the possible questions that you might get about some kind of attack. Now, an external agency would require or would go through a kind of an investigation, and you have to do what? You have to provide them some data, some events, right? What do you think? What would be the optimal choice here? But if we need to share some kind of logs that have been already generated that exist somewhere, we could even batch them somewhere in a cloud monitoring, right? And it's not really those logs, that forensics tools. It's not really about grabbing your telemetry. It's mostly about grabbing what admin logs and system logs, right? So there is a documentation with an overview of house logs. I'm not sure why isn't it opening quickly. Okay, but yeah, something happened, right? So if we look for systems, this is where we see some information that system events are there, admin activity is there, right? Policy denied is there. So this is where admin logs is really kind of an umbrella that gives you a lot of information about what's going on in the platform, like who changed what and when, who accessed some data, what events were produced by the system, who was rejected privileges to do some actions, right? So this is like a broad term. Audit logs is a broad term in Google, and hence this is the answer, right? So remember that audit logs is not only about like accessing your data, but it's much broader term, right? Okay. Asset inventory, another topic that we would cover, and this is quite an interesting one, right? We did not talk about it yet. In the past, there was something called Forseti. I'm not sure if you are aware of that. Basically, it was there in all those online courses also for security exam. And a couple of years ago, when I learned for the exam, it was still there, and it says, well, yeah, this is how it works now, right? So it was a set of functionalities that gave you some, one of those functionalities was about, okay, what assets do you have in the cloud? The other did some other things, right? So a set of functionalities that was a third-party product, but Google was integrated with that quite heavily, right? And it gave you some security, functionalities. As you can see, now it's not anymore even accessible. It's kind of deprecated. It's not developed anymore. So even if you heard about Forseti, like you will not get any questions on the exam on that. And I haven't seen any documents within Google about Forsetis for a number of years, like 3-4 years now. No new documents or implementations out there, right? So Google basically implemented some other services there instead of those third-party ones. One of those is Cloud Asset Inventory, and this is actually quite a useful one, right? Because if we go to assets, right, to asset inventory, and by the way, I'm not sure what's the real difference, but it is asset inventory is in IAM and admin, and assets is in security. But basically, this is where we get some kind of an overview of our assets, meaning our resources within the cloud platform, right? So what's nice about it? The nice thing about it is that I could go all the way up to the organization node. And by doing that, I see all those assets throughout my organization. So for example, here is a very easy way for me to validate where did I deploy my resources, right? Maybe I wanted to keep my data in a specific region only, and now I see that for some reason, those assets are spread like throughout the world, right? What is even more important is that you can do quite a quick overview of the security posture of the whole company using that simple tool, right? Why am I saying that? Because you can filter those results and you can say, okay, let us check if that company is using service account keys extensively, right? So if you filter for those service account keys within my organization, it's like 20 keys, right? Not a lot. And even if you go to a specific one, right, you might be redirected to that specific key, and you might even see that it is not there anymore, right? Maybe I generated it, maybe it doesn't exist anymore, so we're good, right? But for a customer that I have been working for like quite recently, we found out that for a like medium-sized company or even a smaller one, there were like more than 500 of those keys, right? So it already gives you some indication that maybe you should look into that topic, because maybe people prefer to use service account keys as an easier solution than using those short-term ways of handling authentication, right? So this might already give you some idea of the usage of those service account keys, right? What else you can see? You can say, hey, I want to check if that company is following some of the security best practices and if they have enabled those org policy constraints, right? So we have been talking about those. We said that there are some best practices where you should block default VPCs from being created. You should block external IPs from being assigned to VMs and so on and so forth, right? If you filter your assets with org policies. And if you see that there are like 2 policies or 2 constraints enabled, well, you immediately see that that company is doing a poor job when it comes to security, right? So mine organization isn't the best example here. And this is why I'm showing it to you, right? In a very short amount of time, looking at a single service, you can already get some quite interesting insights and then go deeper into each of those. But those already give you some nice like high-level overview of the security posture of the whole organization, right? So be aware of the asset inventory, and not only for the exam, but it is really a useful tool, a simple one that will give you some overview, of the whole organization actually from the security perspective. So a good one. And finally, the toughest topic. So this is where we will spend like roughly 15 minutes probably on talking about those 4 different private services, private connectivity options. You have been learning about those. This is not something totally new for you, but this is first of all more of a network related topic that is like important for security, but maybe you don't have a clear enough overview of those, and I would like to explain those options to you, right? The first option, right, for the exam, you definitely need to differentiate between those and choose one or the other in many cases. The first option is very straightforward, right? It says that if you have your VMs, you should not grant or attach external IPs to those. The first option is very straightforward, right? It says that if you have your VMs, you should not grant or attach external IPs to those VMs, and then you have a challenge because those VMs cannot see Google APIs, right? So if your VM is trying to upload something to a GCS bucket, it can't, and so on and so forth, right? So the solution for that is private Google access. Very the other in many cases. The first option is very straightforward, right? It says that if you have your VMs, you should not grant or attach external IPs to those VMs, and then you have a challenge because do I turn private Google access or on off? Where do I go in the console? What's the level? Okay, meeting says in the VPC. Where exactly in the VPC? This is my VPC. Okay, let us choose this one. Anyone? Subnet level, thank you. And this is critical for the exam, right? Private Google access is enabled or disabled on the subnet level. So please make sure to know that for the exam because they might trick you in that. Okay, moving forward, another way you would use that same private Google access. Why does Google assign public IP? I don't know why, to be honest, but this was their decision. They exposed their APIs with public IPs, and this is why we have all of those, right? Another thing that kind of solves your question, Nikki, right? Because you are basically saying, okay, Google is assigning public IPs, so this means that I would use public network to access those, even if I am like connected with interconnect or cloud VPN for my on-premise, right? That would be a normal use case. My on-premises VMs, for example, they need to upload something to connect public IPs. So this means that I would use public network to access those, even if I am like connected with interconnect or cloud VPN for my on-premise, right? That would be a normal use case. My on-premises VMs, for example, they need to upload something to a GCS bucket. They would go through a public internet to consume those APIs because they are exposed with public IPs, right? The usual case. This doesn't have to be the case, and it shouldn't be the case actually, right? So this slides tell you that if you have already did like private connectivity, like cloud VPN, like interconnect, then you should use the same routes. You should use the connectivity to consume APIs without going like over the public network, right? How do you make it happen? Well, you can check the details in the documentation link here, but basically this is about adjusting your DNS and routing in on-premises. There are those 2 entries like private.googleapis.com. Your DNS and routing in on-premises. There are those 2 entries like private.googleapis.com and restricted.googleapis.com, right? Ones are for services that do not support VPC service controls. The other one are for those that do support VPC service controls. And this is where your on-premises like VMs and resources would use those routes and would use that private connectivity to reach out those Google APIs, right? Make sure to understand it. Make sure to know what are those. You might be asked about those on the exam. Okay. So that was the first use case, right? So when your VMs without external IPs would be consuming some Google API. The second use case is a consumer-producer network, right? So in most cases, we, as Google's customers, are consumers, right? So what do we consume? For example, we consume Cloud SQL, right? Basically some managed services. So basically we consume some services like Cloud SQL, like memory store, right? Like, for example, file store, right? All of those services are managed which means in those cases that we create something, right? We create a Cloud SQL instance, we create a GKE cluster where control plane is managed, or we create like file store instance here, for example, right? And file store, as an example, is a managed NFS, right? So we provision some kind of a solution here. We click create or deploy, and we do not see those VMs. We do not see those persistent disks. We do not see the whole setup architecture. We do not see any NFS daemon running somewhere, right? What we see and what we consume is just a single line. It says, hey, if you want to use that NFS, use that internal IP address, right? And that file surname. So my question, hey, right? All of those consume Cloud SQL. Most VMs without external IPs would be consuming some Google API. The second use case is a consumer producer network, right? So in most cases, we .googleapis.com and restricted.googleapis.com, right? Ones are for services that do not support VPC service controls. The other one are for adjusting your DNS and routing in on-premises. There are those two entries like private.googleapis.com and restricted.googleapis.com, right? Ones are for services that do not support VPC service controls. The other one are for those that do support VPC service controls. And this is where your on-premises like VMs and resources would use those routes and would use that private connectivity to reach out those Google APIs, right? Make sure to understand it. Make sure to know what are those. You might be asked about those on the exam. Okay, so that was the first use case, right? When your VMs without external IPs would be consuming some Google API. The second use case is a consumer producer network, right? Right? So in most cases, we, as Google's customers, are consumers, right? So what do we consume? For example, we consume Cloud SQL, right? Basically some managed services. So basically we consume some services like Cloud SQL, like memory store, right? Like, for example, file store, right? All of those services are managed, which means in those cases that we create something, right? We create a Cloud SQL instance, we create a GKE cluster where control plane is managed, or we create like file store instance here, for example, right? And file store, as an example, is a managed NFS, right? So we provision some kind of a solution here. We click create or deploy, and we do not see those VMs. We do not see those persistent disks. We do not see the whole setup architecture. We do not see any NFS daemon running somewhere, right? What we see and what we consume is just a single line. It says, hey, if you want to use that NFS, use that internal IP address, right? And that file surname. So my question to you is like, if that's a managed service, if we are consuming it, where does it all land, right? Where are all those VMs, all those persistent disks, all that infrastructure for file store, for memory store, for Cloud SQL? Where do they get deployed to if it's not here? Like, we don't see those. If I went to VMs, I wouldn't see a VM for that solution. So where does it land? If I am a consumer, I am consuming something here, and that something, well, needs to be deployed somewhere. But where is that somewhere? Who can tell me, right? Where are all those VMs? No one. So those VMs are in some data center closest to the consumer. Yeah, but who's the owner? Like, we are consuming a service. Since this is a Google service, those VMs, those persistent disks are within Google's project, within Google's VPC. This is the key, right? If we would be consuming something else, like maybe NetApp, right? NetApp also has their own NFS. Then we would go through a similar process. We would create a volume. And again, underneath, there would be VMs, there would be persistent disks, but they would be hosted in NetApp's VPC, in NetApp's project, right? Now, why am I saying that to you? Because if such a consumer producer setup is there, you need to reach out, you need to consume that service using an internal IP, right? Now, how do I see an internal IP if, as we just said, this is not our VPC, right? So how do I see internally another VPC, which is not mine, but which is managed by Google, which is managed by NetApp, which is managed by any third party? How do you connect to two VPCs together? What was the name? Peering, VPC peering, right? So if you go to VPC peering here, right? Where was that? Where is it? VPC network peering, right? You would see that I have such a connectivity there, right? So this is to say that normally you would set up VPC peering if you just want to explicitly connect two VPCs together. But if you have such a consumer-producer setup, where basically you are deploying something from within your VPC, but that something gets deployed in a VPC managed by Google or by third party, then we need to have that VPC peering to get that connectivity, right? And technically, that VPC peering or consumer-producer setup is just called PSA, right? Private service. Right? And technically, that VPC peering or consumer-producer setup is just called PSA, right? Private service access. This is where I did not create that VPC peering just by myself, but when I was deploying FileStore, right? And when I said create, it said, hey, you need that peering in order to see that service. Would you like me to create that peering for you, right? So this is the second use case. You are consuming some service, and because you need connectivity to someone else's VPC, then that private service access is created, and technically it's just VPC peering under, right? So this is the second use case. The third one is called serverless VPC access. What that is it's where you would deploy your services, your application, to something serverless, to a cloud function, to Cloud Run, to App Engine standard. For example, right? And let's have a look at that. If you go to Cloud Run, then you need to do what? You need to, when you create a new service, you would choose a container image, right? You would say, what's the name of the service? Where do you want to have it located? And you just click create, right? You don't define any VPC, subnets, IPs, firewall rules, nothing of that sort. You just want to deploy your image onto Google's infrastructure, and you want to get a protected HTTPS-based endpoint, right? Or URL. Now, it's all good, but there are situations where your serverless needs to connect to your VPC, right? So let's assume that within your VPC, you created, I don't know, a Cloud SQL, or maybe you created just a VM, right, with MongoDB or any kind of a database. And now this service, this Cloud Run service, this serverless service, needs to access that database of yours, right? Now, how does it access that database? Serverless needs to connect to your VPC, right? So let's assume that within your VPC, you created, I don't know, a Cloud SQL, or maybe you created just a VM, right, with MongoDB or any kind of a database. And now this service, this Cloud Run service, this serverless service, needs to access that database of yours, right? Now, how does it access that database if it is deployed to Google's VPC? You don't control it anyhow. You don't know where it is. So how can it access your workloads that you created, right? And the solution to that use case is called serverless VPC access, right? So first of all, you would connect, create, right? And the solution was VPC. You don't control it anyhow. You don't know where it is. So how can it access your workloads that you created, right? And the solution to that use case is called serverless VPC access, right? So first of all, you would connect to, you would create so-called serverless, so-called, how are they called? Connectors, right? So in serverless access, you would create a connector. A connector is technically just a VM or a bunch of VMs that sit in one of the regions, in one of the networks and subnets. And this is where, when you would be creating a Cloud Run service, you would say, hey, I anticipate that this Cloud Run service would need to connect to a specific VPC for outbound traffic, meaning it might need to go to my VMs, for example, to consume some service, right? To consume MongoDB, for example, that I deployed somewhere, right? And this is where you would point to that connector that you have just created here, right? So this is to say that the serverless VPC access is a way to create a connector, which is a kind of a proxy, right? And those serverless products would use that proxy to consume your VPC, for example, to consume some service, right? To consume MongoDB, for example, that I deployed somewhere, right? And this is where you would point to that connector that you have just created here, right? So this is to say consume for outbound traffic of VMs that sit in one of the regions, in one of the networks and subnets. And this is where, when you would be creating a Cloud Run service, you would say, hey, I anticipate that this Cloud Run service would need to connect to a specific VPC for outbound traffic, meaning it might need to go to my VMs, for example, to consume some service, right? To consume MongoDB, for example, that I deployed somewhere, right? And this is where you would point to that connector that you have just created here, right? So this is to say that the serverless VPC access is a way to create a connector, which is a kind of a proxy, right? And those serverless products would use that proxy to consume your VPCs, right? This is what you need to know for the exam. Don't go much deeper. For the real life situations, like since a month or two, so this is a very fresh thing there, Google tries to eliminate those connectors. They are saying now, at least with Cloud Run, you could just send traffic directly to your VPC. From now on, probably you don't need those connectors at all. Maybe there are some use cases that you would still need them, but basically Google is making it simpler, but the exam still is not aware of that, obviously, right? Because it's a new thing, right? Okay, so we have learned about 3 different connectivity options, how to enable each of those. The 4th one is called Private Service Connect, right? So I just want to go too deep here, but basically this is the newest one. This is where Google is saying in the future, whenever you would be consuming something, those might be our APIs, those might be our services, those might be some third-party services as well, right? You wouldn't have to do that VPC peering, that that you defined previously, addressing Knitting's question, right? About have to do that VPC peering that you defined previously, addressing Knitting's question, right? About those public APIs. This is also the solution. Private Service Connect is also a solution for those public APIs, because with those, you can really decide within your VPC which IP addresses do you use to consume Google APIs, right? So in other words, you switch from just blindly consuming a set of IPs that Google gives you to consciously say, hey, this is my CIDR range, internal one, that I would use to consume Google's APIs. And this is one of the security requirements of some companies, right? They don't want to consume just anything. They want to define everything they consume as an internal resource, right? And that Private Service Connect, it does not anymore require VPC peering. And there is a document about it that basically it is like some kind of a roadmap, right? So Google is rolling out Private Service Connects to more and more services. So here, let me paste you the link here. Basically, this is where Google is saying, if you can access this or that service with Private Service Connect. So for example, if you were planning to consume Cloud SQL, then now for security reasons, for connectivity reasons, for latency reasons, probably you don't need to create that peering anymore, but you can use Private Service Connect, right? But if I plan to consume not Cloud SQL, but that file store of mine, right, the fully managed service, then on the documentation, I do not see file store yet, right? Maybe it will be there in a month, in half a year, I don't know. But until that happens, I need to still use that Private Service access. I cannot use this one, right? And also Google is trying to make it happen for some third-party services. Some most popular one, like Databricks, Datadog, Snowflake, Elasticsearch, and so on and so forth, right? So this is where in the future it will be easier and more secure to consume some of those services. Okay, that would be the end of the topic. Let us have a look at the, well, at one of the questions, and I will have a look at Nitin's question. Third-party apps hosted in other public cloud can have access to Google. Of course, well, since since Google APIs are exposed with public IPs, you can access them from just anywhere. That anywhere can be your laptop, can be your on-premises, can be AWS VM, right? You can access them without any issues. So your AWS application can, write something to a GCS pack. Yes, it explains why APIs have public IPs. Now, if you have that kind of a use case where like AWS VM needs to consume Google services, then it does so using public internet, like by default. But just like we said for on-premises, if you set up Cloud VPN, but not between GCP and on-premises, but between AWS and on-premises, then, AWS and Google and GCP, this is where you have private link. So you can also use the private link to consume those Google APIs, right? Not to go just blindly through the public internet. And public IPs, private service connect may need to coexist. Of course, so public IPs are not going anywhere for those GCP APIs. It's just Google is saying private service connect is an option which you can use to consume those Google APIs in a more defined and secure manner, because this is you who decide what you want to consume, how you want to consume it, what IPs will be using, right? Okay. Going back to the question, what is it about? Some kind of an audit, one-time review of cloud's usage. Auditors should be able to access default VPC. We need to enable them access from their on-premises environment, which already has a configured VPN. It is quite an advanced one, I would say. So remember me saying where you don't have to focus on DNS too much. Here, actually, you need to have some basic understanding of what DNS zones are, right? And on top of that, well, it's only like DNS zones, right? It doesn't go deeper than that, so it's not super advanced. It says that they have a VPN, Cloud VPN configured. So I would eliminate like B and D. Ashish says eliminate A and C. But if they have like configured Cloud VPN already, then why would we want to use partner or direct interconnect? This is where I would eliminate them at the very start, right? Because the connectivity is there, okay? And now we would use either your DNS provider to create DNS zones and records, or use Cloud DNS and set up on-premises routing with Cloud Router, or what do you think, A or C now if we eliminate the two ones? Eliminate A, exactly, that's a C. Why is it C? Probably due to different reasons as well. But if I'm seeing that, something like use a software-defined firewall to manage incoming and outgoing requests, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound like a cloud-native approach. You know that with clouds, with GCP, you have Cloud Router, right? That you can have dynamic topography exchange, right? You wouldn't want to use some software-defined firewall, which is there in the first answer, right? So that's how you might think about it. Okay, I think that's enough from the technical perspective. I also prepared a couple of slides that I don't want to go deeper into, but just let me highlight them for you, right? Security Foundations Blueprint is basically how you make it all happen, meaning you have been learning through different services without too much of a context, right? You learned about one or then the other, and the third one, and then how do they even match? What is the order of deploying them, and so on and so forth. You didn't have the big picture. So this is a number of slides that tells you what should you start from, right? When you are onboarding a GCP organization, what are the steps that you follow at the beginning until the end to introduce that foundational security settings using all those services that you have been learning about, right? So a kind of a story. I guess you will be able to read it like on your own using those slides and that explanation right here. So I don't want to go deeper there, because we still need to cover a couple of things. First of all, let me share that I will share a link with a bonus quiz with you, right? So there will be a quiz that is really similar to the one that you might expect on the exam from the difficulty perspective and so on and so forth. It's like roughly 30 questions, so quite a lot, like quite a long one. It is definitely harder than the quizzes that we went through each week. So this is where you might validate your knowledge and see if you are there yet, right? Make sure to go for that quiz. Make sure to do good with those questions. If you reach those levels, then it is a clear indication that probably you should sign up for the exam, right? That you already know enough. Another set of slides, like 4 slides that you will find, talk about what I was asked about during my exam, right? So after I took the exam, I sat down and of course, I didn't note down the questions. I did not remember those, but I noted the topics that I was asked about, right? So another resource for you to have a look at and to go line by line and to validate if you are feeling good with that topic, right? Do you know what DNSSEC is and what it protects against, right? Do you know what are authorized views in BigQuery, how you can control privileges from different perspectives, right? How do you redirect specific logs to external CM tools, right? This is what we covered today, actually. What are restricted Google APIs, right? What load balancers can be used with Cloud Armor, right? And so on and so forth. Every line here should be more or less clear here. If you do not know what it talks about, again, this is another indication that you may still work a little bit on those topics. In many cases, you have some links there, so just use them, just go a little bit deeper, and you should be good, right? So that's another thing. The third one, I think of, so it depends, right? There is a spreadsheet that I created, and you will get a link to that spreadsheet here on one of the slides. Basically, this is a list of, well, first of all, we have 3 tabs, right? A tab for architect's exam, networking exam, and security one. This is the one that you are aiming for. And once you, well, this is where I tried to list all those Google services and functionalities, right? So we have like a lot of lines, like 200 something. This is why it may scare you a little bit. So I'm not insisting that you would use it, but you might use it in such a way that you would make a copy, right, of that spreadsheet. Then you would have a read-write copy for yourself, right? And you can go through that list, because here I tried to identify how deep you need to go into those services, right? So for example, okay, do you know what's a Titan security key, right? You have to know the basics. You don't have to know everything. Well, okay, I'm aware of what's that, what the use case. I evaluate my knowledge to basic. This is like enough from my perspective, right? Now, access transparency. Do I know about that? Well, yeah, I know something, but not really. I don't feel that this is like medium level. Maybe that's still basic. So if I am still missing some knowledge here, then I would commit. I would like spend 5, 10, 20 minutes on reading that thing, on watching a YouTube material about it, on like, you know, going a little bit deeper, and maybe I will be able to, give me a sec, to upskill a little bit and make them equal, right? So this is the idea behind that spreadsheet. This isn't any kind of an official Google resource. This is something that I have done. It's quite opinionated. It's not like perfect. So just use it if you feel that it might be useful for you, right? If you don't, then like skip it, right? But yeah, it might be useful. The next thing I wanted to show you is basically how to sign up for the exam. Your certificates from GCP. Stage. To pass. Really important. Then proactive, right? So this is